The night Draven Morn told me I was only a maid, I was standing in his throne room in front of his entire court. My hands were shaking, my eyes were full, and I had just asked him the question I had been terrified to ask for 15 years. Did I ever matter to you? The court went silent. Every noble, every council member, every guard who had watched me move through that palace since I was a child, all of them waiting. And Draven looked at me with the controlled, careful expression of a king who had already decided and was not going to show anyone what it cost him. Then he said the 4 words that ended everything we had ever been. You forgot your place. A pause. You are only a maid. I stood there for a long moment, long enough to understand that the person I had loved since I was 12 years old had just looked at me in front of everyone and chosen his crown. Then I turned, and I walked out of his throne room. And I did not look back, because the woman who had spent 15 years believing she was invisible to him had finally been seen. And what he showed her when he looked was not what she had spent 15 years hoping for. What came after that day was not what either of us expected. Welcome to MoonNoir. If you have ever loved someone who could not see your worth until it was standing beside someone else, this story is for you. Subscribe and like if this is your first time here. Let us begin. I was 7 years old when my parents died. A fever that moved through the eastern quarter of Valdris so quickly that by the time the healers understood what they were dealing with, it had already taken half the street. It took my mother on a Tuesday, my father on a Thursday, and left me standing in the corridor of the healing ward on a Friday with nothing except the dress I was wearing and the specific, hollow feeling of a child who understands that the people who were supposed to be her entire world are simply gone. The palace took me in, not out of sentiment, out of practicality. The head housekeeper was a woman named Maren who believed that capable children became capable servants, and that capable servants were more valuable than gold. She looked at me the way she looked at everything, with the specific assessment of someone calculating usefulness. Then she handed me a cloth and pointed at the corridor floor. I cleaned it, and the next corridor, and the next. And by the time the sun went down, I had found the thing that would define the next 15 years of my life. A place to belong. It was not the palace itself. It was not the work. It was the boy I met on the 3rd day. He was sitting at the top of the servants' staircase, eating an apple, with the specific, focused attention of someone who had recently discovered that the servants' staircase was an excellent place to be invisible. He was 10 years old, Crown Prince of Valdris, and he looked at me with the same direct assessment that Maren had used. Then he offered me half the apple. I took it. We sat in silence for a while. Then he said, "You are new. Yes. Are you scared?" I thought about it honestly. Not of the work. He nodded. Good. Then he went back to his apple. And I went back to mine. That was how it started. Not with drama, not with ceremony. Simply 2 children sharing an apple on a staircase, because neither of them had anywhere more important to be. Over the years that followed, I learned Draven Morn, the way you learned the palace itself. Room by room. Detail by detail. Through accumulated observation, rather than any single revelation. I learned that he took his tea without sugar, but with a specific ratio of milk that varied slightly depending on his mood. I learned that his headaches started behind his left eye and moved forward, and that the specific way he held his jaw told you exactly how bad it was going to get. I learned that he read late when something was troubling him, and that the specific texts he chose told you what kind of trouble it was. I learned that he trusted almost nobody completely, and that the short list of people he trusted completely included me. Not because I was exceptional, because I was consistent. I was always there, in the way that certain people were always there. Not demanding, not performing, simply present. And in a life that was structured entirely around performance and demand, that specific quality of simply being present became the most valuable thing I had to offer. I did not know I was in love with him until I was 16. And by the time I understood it, I also understood that it was the kind of love I was never going to say out loud. Because maids did not dream of kings, and I was not foolish enough to believe that the way he looked at me sometimes meant what I wanted it to mean. So I loved him quietly, the way you loved the moon, from a distance, without expectation, and I told myself that was enough. For a very long time, I almost believed it. I was 15 the night the assassins came. Draven was 17. Second year of his formal governance training, already beginning to carry the specific weight of someone who understood that one day the kingdom would be entirely his responsibility. I discovered the plot by accident, the way most important things were discovered, not through brilliance, through being in the wrong corridor at the right moment. Two men in servants' clothing speaking quietly in the storage room off the eastern kitchen. The prince's name, a date, a method. I understood what I was hearing before they finished the sentence. I did not think about what I did next. I simply did it. I went to the guards, but not before the conspirators saw me, and not before they disappeared into the network of palace passages that the palace guards did not know as well as the palace servants did. The real conspirators were gone. All that remained was me, standing in the corridor, having raised an alarm that had no visible source except myself. The investigation took 3 days. I said nothing about what I had actually seen, because the men I had heard had mentioned a name, a council member, a man with enough political allies to make an accusation without proof, the kind of thing that started civil conflicts rather than ended them. The investigation needed someone to blame. I gave them me, not heroically, not dramatically. Simply because I was there and the alternative was watching something far worse unfold, and I did not know how to choose the worst thing when the less worse thing was available. The punishment was public. I remember the specific quality of the courtyard on that morning. Cold. Grey. The assembled household watching, because that was what was required of them. Draven was there. He had to be there. He watched without expression. The controlled, careful expression I would later recognise as the one he wore when something was costing him considerably more than he was showing. He knew what I had done. He knew why. And he said nothing. Because saying something would have required explaining what there was to say. And explaining would have started the civil conflict I had taken the punishment to prevent. I understood this. It did not make the understanding comfortable. What it made, it was a debt, a specific debt that sat between us for years afterward, unspoken, unacknowledged, simply present. The way certain things were simply present between people who had been through something together and had decided by mutual silent agreement not to name it. She came in the 12th year, Princess Valdine of the Eastern Alliance, beautiful in the way of someone who had been raised understanding that beauty was a political instrument and had applied that understanding with considerable precision. She arrived with a delegation, trade routes, military support, resources the kingdom needed badly enough that the council had been discussing it for 2 years. I served her tea on her second morning. She watched me pour it, Then she looked at Draven, then back at me, with the specific look of someone who has identified something they consider a problem and is already calculating how to address it. I noticed the look. I said nothing. I finished pouring the tea, and I went back to the kitchen. That evening I heard from another servant that the princess had made a comment. Nothing explicit. Simply the kind of observation that powerful women made when they wanted to communicate something to the people around them without committing to having actually said it. The kind of comment that planted ideas without being responsible for them. I told myself it meant nothing. I told myself this with the specific determination of someone who could already feel the ground shifting beneath them. I kept working. That was what I did when things were uncertain. I kept working. The council met 3 times in the week that followed. I knew because I served the refreshments at 2 of them and listened in the specific way that palace servants learn to listen. Not intrusively, simply present, in a way that made people forget there was someone in the room who could hear them. The alliance terms were favourable. The princess's family was willing to commit resources that would address 3 of the kingdom's most pressing vulnerabilities. The council was enthusiastic. Draven was careful in the way he was always careful, working through every implication before committing to any of them. Then the condition arrived, not in a council meeting, in a private conversation between the princess and Draven that I was not present for, but heard about the following morning from the kind of source that palace servants always developed if they stayed long enough. The princess had been direct. She had seen the way he trusted me, the way his entire bearing shifted when I was in the room, the way he called for me specifically. She was not prepared to enter a marriage with that particular variable unaddressed. The maid must be gone, not reassigned, not promoted elsewhere in the palace. Gone. Out of his life. Permanently. And the condition was met with the speed that told me Draven had been looking for a way to solve a problem he had identified long before the princess named it. I learned what he had arranged from a kitchen girl who thought she was telling me something I already knew. A marriage. To Commander Theron Ashvale. A posting in the Northern Territories. Effective within the month. I stood in the kitchen for a long time after she told me. Then I went to find him. The throne room was full, not of a formal assembly, simply the court going about its ordinary afternoon. Council members, nobles, guards, the specific population of people who were always present in the spaces where power was exercised. I should have waited. I understood that even at the time. I should have requested a private audience. I should have been careful. I was not careful. Because the thing inside my chest that had spent 15 years being very careful had finally run out of the ability to be careful any longer. He saw me when I entered. His expression moved very slightly, the way it moved when something unexpected had entered his field of awareness. I crossed the room. I stood before him. The court went quiet the way courts went quiet when something was happening that was not on the schedule. I looked at him, not desperately, not performing. Simply looking at the person who had been the centre of my entire life since I was 12 years old and asking the question I had needed to ask for 15 years. Please tell me this isn't true. His expression settled into something more controlled. The arrangements have already been made. I stared at him. The entire court watching. Then I asked the question that had been sitting in my chest since the kitchen girl told me what he had done. After all these years. A pause. Did I ever matter to you? The silence in that room was the most complete silence I had ever stood inside. Every noble, every council member, every guard who had watched me move through that palace since I was 7 years old. All of them waiting. And Draven looked at me with the controlled expression of a man who had made his decision and was going to hold it regardless of what it cost him. You forgot your place. A pause. You are only a maid. I stood there. For a long moment, I simply stood there. Long enough to understand completely, not just what he had said, what he had chosen to say. He could have said anything else. He could have been kind about it. He could have been quiet about it. He chose those specific words, in that specific room, in front of those specific people, because he was ending it so completely that nothing could survive the ending, because he was a king, and kings were thorough. I looked at him for one final moment. Then I turned, and I walked out of his throne room, and I did not look back. The Northern Territories were everything the palace was not. Practical, cold, without ceremony. Theron Ashvale met me at the territory border with 2 guards and no speech. He was not what I expected. I had expected someone who matched the reputation, feared throughout the kingdom, controlled, distant, someone who had agreed to this arrangement as a political convenience and would treat me accordingly. Instead, he was simply a man, tall, quiet, with the specific quality of stillness that came from someone who had learned long ago that speaking less was almost always more effective than speaking more. He looked at me the way Edric had looked at Zyra, not assessing usefulness, simply seeing. We rode to his residence in silence. He showed me my rooms, which were not servants' quarters, which were rooms, real rooms, with a window and a writing desk and a fire that someone had lit before we arrived. I stood in the doorway looking at them. He stood in the corridor. Then he said the thing that dismantled the last of what I had been holding together since the throne room. You have spent your life in service to other people. I looked at him. His expression was direct and entirely without performance. You will not be required to serve me. I stared at him. I am not asking for a servant. A pause. I am offering a home. What you choose to do with it is entirely up to you. Then he turned and walked back down the corridor, and I stood in the doorway of my rooms, with a window and a writing desk and a fire, and I understood for the first time in 15 years what it felt like to be somewhere that was not contingent on my usefulness. I did not fall in love with Theron immediately. That would not have been honest. What I did was begin. Simply begin. The way certain things began. Quietly, without announcement. Simply the accumulation of small moments that eventually became something neither of us had planned. He saw things I didn't know were visible. The first time I flinched when he raised his voice at a subordinate in the corridor. Not at me, simply at someone else. Simply a raised voice in a corridor. He noticed. He did not comment immediately. He simply adjusted. The raised voice became something else. Without explanation. Without making me feel that I had caused something to be managed. Simply adjusted. The first time he saw the scars. We had been in the territory for 3 months. I was carrying a heavy basket, and the sleeve of my dress had shifted. He saw. He said nothing in the moment. That evening after dinner, when the household had retired, he came and found me in the library. He sat across from me. He said, "You don't have to tell me." I looked at him. "But if you ever want to, I will listen." I told him, not immediately, Not that evening, but eventually. All of it. The assassins, the corridor, the punishment I had taken to protect a prince who had grown into a king, who had looked at me in front of his entire court and told me I was only a maid. Theron listened without interrupting, without the specific quality that men sometimes had when they were listening, but also constructing their response. Simply listened. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "He knew what you sacrificed." "Yes." He said nothing. Theron looked at the fire. "And he still let you stand in that throne room alone?" "Yes." Another silence. "Then, I want you to understand something." I looked at him. "What you carried." He met my eyes. "It was never yours to carry alone." I sat with that for a long time. Then I said something I had not planned to say. Nobody ever told me that before. He looked at me steadily. Then someone should have. I did not cry. I had cried everything I had in the throne room. What I felt now was different, quieter. The specific feeling of something that had been held in tension for a very long time, finally being permitted to settle. Back in Valdris, the palace was quiet in the way that specific absences made things quiet, not empty, simply without a particular quality that had been so consistently present that its absence was louder than any sound. Nobody left tea the way she did. Nobody remembered the small things. Nobody pushed back when he was wrong in the specific way that was honest without being disrespectful. Nobody saw the man beneath the crown. He told himself this was fine. He told himself it was necessary. He told himself the alliance was secured and the kingdom was stable and he had made the correct decision. He told himself this with the specific determination of someone who understands that if they stop telling themselves something, they will have to start examining it instead. Then the examination began, not by choice, by accumulation. A guard who had been in the courtyard on that morning mentioned something in passing. A council member who had known the full history let something slip during a discussion of palace security. A servant who had been there for the punishment came to him voluntarily because she had been carrying something for 12 years and had finally decided to put it down. Each revelation was a wound. The corridor, the conspirators, the choice she had made without telling him, the punishment she had taken without explaining, the debt that had sat between them for years that he had never found a way to address. And then the final revelation, the one that made everything else unbearable. She had loved him, not in the vague way of someone who was loyal to their employer, in the specific, complete way of someone who had built their entire world around a person and had never once allowed themselves to say so because they understood that person's world did not have room for them in that way. He sat with all of this for a long time, in the healing ward, in the specific place where she had kept the herbs arranged the way she arranged them, where the light came through the window at the angle she had always said was best for close work, where everything was exactly as she had left it, because nobody had been able to bring themselves to change it. He sat there, and he understood what he had done. Not just what he had said, what he had chosen to say, and what it had cost. The military gathering happened 14 months after she left. Commanders from allied territories, senior warriors, the specific assembly of people that Draven attended because the kingdom required it of him. He was not expecting her. He had not been told she would be there. He turned, and she was standing across the courtyard, different, not in the ways he could name immediately, in the ways that accumulated before the naming happened, straighter, quieter, in a way that was not the quietness of someone trying to be invisible. the quietness of someone who had stopped needing to be. She was standing beside Theron Ashvale, not behind him, not in the position of someone accompanying. Beside him, as an equal, as someone who belonged there because she had chosen to be there. And then the bond arrived, not gently, not gradually, like something that had been held back by a door that had just been removed without warning. The mate bond, complete and immediate and absolutely certain. The moon goddess delivering a truth that should have been obvious years ago. She had always been his fated mate. The bond had been dormant because he had never opened the part of himself that would have allowed it to form. And now it was open. Because it was too late, she felt it. He could see the moment it arrived in her. The way her expression changed, the way she went still, the way her eyes found his across the courtyard with the specific quality of recognition that the mate bond always produced. Then she looked at him, and he understood the specific cruelty of what the moon goddess had arranged. She felt the bond, and it changed nothing, because love was not the problem, trust was, and trust was harder to rebuild than love. And she had spent 14 months learning what it felt like to be with someone who had never once made her doubt she was worth choosing. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she looked at Theron. And the expression that crossed her face when she looked at Theron was the expression he had spent years hoping she might one day look at him with. Complete, unguarded, safe. Draven stood across the courtyard and felt for the first time the specific helplessness that she had felt in the throne room, the specific feeling of knowing exactly what you wanted and understanding completely that you had no right to reach for it. He had given her away, and she had found something better. And the moon goddess had waited until it was too late to tell him what she had always been. He found her alone the following morning, not strategically, simply the specific chance of two people in the same corridor at the same moment. She saw him coming. She did not leave. That told him something. They stood in the corridor, neither of them speaking for a moment. Then he said the thing he had needed to say for 14 months. "I am sorry." She looked at him, not with the expression of someone who had been waiting for it, with the expression of someone who had stopped needing it and was now simply receiving it. "I know." He looked at her. "I know what you sacrificed." He paused. "All of it." She was quiet. "I know what I said in the throne room." His voice was steady, but barely. "And I know that it was the worst thing I have ever done." She looked at him for a long time. "Did you ever stop loving me?" The question arrived before he could stop it. She considered it honestly, the way she considered everything, with the specific completeness of someone who did not deal in comfortable versions of truth. No. His breath caught. "I loved you for a very long time." He thought he heard something in that. Then she continued. "But love was not enough to make you choose me." A pause. "And it is not enough to make me choose you now." He looked at her. She met his eyes. "The bond is real," she said. "I feel it. I know you feel it." A pause. "But the bond is not a debt. It is not an obligation. It is not something either of us has to act on simply because the moon goddess decided 14 months too late to tell the truth." His expression was the most destroyed it had ever been. She looked at him steadily. "I forgive you, Draven. For all of it." A pause. "But forgiveness is not the same as returning, and I am not returning." She held his gaze for one final moment. Then she turned and walked back toward the room where Theron was waiting. The ceremony was held in the Northern Territories, in the specific, practical beauty of a place that valued what was real over what was impressive. I wore the dress Wren had helped me choose. Not white. A deep blue that Theron had said once reminded him of the northern sky in the hour before dawn. He was waiting at the front of the gathered assembly, not performing, not displaying, simply there. The way he was always simply there, the way that had taken me 14 months to understand, was the most valuable thing anyone had ever offered me. The assembly was full. Theron's territory, his warriors, his household, people who had watched me arrive as someone else's cast off and had seen me become something else entirely in the 14 months since, and at the back of the assembly. Because protocol required him to attend, because refusing would have required an explanation he did not have. Draven Morn, Alpha King of Valdris. Standing at the back of the gathering watching, I did not look at him directly. I did not need to. I knew he was there the way you knew where the bond was. Always. Without having to check. Theron took my hands. He looked at me the way he always looked at me. Seeing, simply seeing. Not the maid, not the cast-off, not the woman the king had discarded. Me, Serana. The person who had survived everything that had been done to her and had built something real from the wreckage. He made his vows without performance, without theatre. In the specific, quiet way of a man who meant every word, because he had chosen every word carefully before he said it. And when he finished, he looked at me with the expression that I had spent 15 years hoping someone would one day look at me with. Like I was the answer to something. Like I was chosen. Completely. Without condition. I made my vows, and for the first time in my life, every word I said was exactly what I meant. After the ceremony, I found Draven at the edge of the gathering, preparing to leave. He looked up when I approached. Something moved through his expression. Hope arriving and departing in the same second. I let it arrive and depart, because what I had come to say was not the thing he was hoping for. Thank you. He frowned. For what? I looked at him. For sending me away. He stared at me. If you hadn't. A pause. I would never have found the man who taught me what it feels like to be chosen. I looked at Draven for a long moment. The boy who had shared an apple on a staircase, the king who had said 4 words that ended everything, both real, both him, neither one, the whole of him. I hope one day you find what you were looking for, I said. Then I turned, and I walked back to Theron, and I did not look back. The kingdom of Valdris told the story differently depending on who was telling it. Some said the Alpha King had sent away the wrong woman. Some said the maid had married above her station. Some said the commander had taken something that was not his. None of them were right. What actually happened was simpler than all of their stories. A girl grew up in a palace. She loved a king who could not see what was standing in front of him. And when he finally saw it, he had already given it away with 4 words. You are only a maid. And somewhere in the Northern Territories, a woman who had spent 15 years being invisible was finally seen, not as a servant, not as a political inconvenience, not as something to be arranged and dispensed with when inconvenient, as herself, Serana, the person the moon goddess had always intended her to be. And the man who had called her only a maid spent the rest of his life understanding what he had lost. Not just his mate, the woman who would have chosen him above everyone else, and who had chosen someone else instead, with her whole heart, without looking back. Take a moment with that. Then tell me which moment got you. You are only a maid. The apple on the staircase. She took the punishment meant for him. He said nothing. Please tell me this isn't true. Did I ever matter to you? You forgot your place. You will not be required to serve me. Nobody left tea the way she did. He sat in the healing ward alone, in the place where everything was exactly as she had left it. The mate bond arriving 14 months too late. She felt it, and it changed nothing. Love was not enough to make you choose me, and it is not enough to make me choose you now. Thank you for sending me away. If you hadn't, I never would have found the man who taught me what it feels like to be chosen. Tell me which one. I read every single one. Subscribe and turn on notifications. The next story is already waiting. Until then, take care of yourself. And remember, the person who calls you only a maid is not the person who deserves to call you theirs. MoonNoir.